1, 2, 3. Hey guys, welcome back to SciXShy. Now in this lesson, we're going to be talking about glycolysis, and it's going to be our first lesson in our chapter on cellular respiration and photosynthesis. Now, today, glycolysis is a part of cellular respiration. And when we talk about cellular respiration, a majority of the time we're talking about your organelle called the mitochondria. But glycolysis is actually not done in the mitochondria. It's found in the cytoplasm. And this is kind of important because eukaryotes and prokaryotes both use glycolysis. But prokaryotes don't have mitochondria, so the rest of the steps are not found in prokaryotes. Their method of producing energy mainly relies on glycolysis. And a couple other steps we'll be going over in later lessons, but for now, let's talk about the basics of glycolysis. And to do that, we also need to talk about some fundamental reactions or fundamental steps and molecules. The first is your redox reaction, and it's split up into reduction and oxidation. So reduction means you gain electrons, while oxidation means you lose electrons. And the reason why gains is in red and loses is in blue is because your molecule becomes more positive when it loses your electron, and your molecule becomes more negative when it gains your electron. And an example that is found a lot in glycolysis and the rest of cellular respiration is your NAD plus a phosphate ion turns into NADH. And this is a reduction because your NAD plus accepts that electron. Now, two other very important molecules are ATP and ADP. Now, ATP is the cell's energy carrier. And carries energy for the cell for different reactions, and that energy is stored in these phosphate bonds. Now, the structure of ATP is made up of adenine and ribose, plus these three phosphate ions, and ATP is called adenosine triphosphate, and so the name also helps you understand the structure, and we've seen this a lot in biology. Now, ADP is the same structure, except it only has two phosphate ions. And when you add that third phosphate ion, energy is stored in there. And so when that phosphate bond is broken, you get a release of energy. Now, going back to glycolysis, now that we've gone over these molecules and reactions, let's talk about the steps of glycolysis. It starts with your glucose, which is the sugar that is used. Now, a lot of these are intermediates. You have glucose 6-phosphate, fructose 6-phosphate, and then you have these three different enzymes. Main one being PFK, phosphofructokinase. But how do you end up with your final product from this reaction? You get fructose 1,6-bisphosphate. To understand what this structure is, let's talk about the name. So you have fructose 1, which means it's it has this pentagon shape of fructose. And then it's 6-bisphosphate. And so it has two phosphate groups, which you can see here. So what steps caused glucose to become fructose 1,6-bisphosphate? Well, you have ATP to ADP. Now what is happening is that the third phosphate is added to the glucose. And so that's why you get only a product of ADP, because that phosphate is added to the glucose. Now, how do you get the fructose structure? Well, you can see here that glucose 6-phosphate to fructose 6-phosphate, glucose at this step is changed to a fructose. And finally, you get that second addition of the second phosphate group, which is why you have these two phosphate groups at the end when you get the result of fructose 1,6-bisphosphate. So this is the first step of glycolysis. And then you move on to the next one. And that's when you get a product of G3P. Now, G3P is glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate, and it's very important in the steps of glycolysis. But you can also see that you also have DHAP, or dihydroxyacetone phosphate. Now, let's look back at the 3 carbons that were found in or 6 carbons in your glucose. So here you have, we've labeled them. And here we've also labeled them. So you can see that your glucose is actually broken up into 2 3-carbon molecules. So what happens now? Well, your DHAP is converted by this enzyme into G3P. So as a result, you have two G3P molecules. Now this G3P is involved in the majority of ATP production in glycolysis. So here again, you can see you have that NAD plus that phosphate ion producing NADH, something we've talked about before, this reduction. And as this continues, you can see that we have these intermediates. You have ATP production, which is when that phosphate group is removed from the molecule. Then you have another ADP to ATP, and that's through pyruvate kinase, and that's the second phosphate group leaving. And so you end up with pyruvate, which is a 3-carbon molecule. And this is the final molecule that's produced at the end of glycolysis. And so this is what's going into cellular respiration to continue the energy production. And we've finished glycolysis. We've finished these full reactions. Now, what are our products from this? What do we get? Well, you get pyruvate. You get 2 pyruvates because let's not forget that you end up with 2 G3P or 2 3-carbon molecules. You also get 2 NADH because NADH is produced here. So you get 2 NADH, and we'll be talking about the importance of NADH later on. And then you get 4 ATP. So because you have 2 G3P, all of these products are doubled. So you have 2 of this reaction from G3P to pyruvate, which results in 2 times the amount of ATP that is produced in that single reaction. And so finally you get 4 ATP. Now this is the end of glycolysis, and you can join back next week and learn about the rest of cellular respiration.